All right, we're here with Malvin Miller, and can you tell us where we're at?
We're in the Baptist Cemetery at Beulah, North Dakota. This,
Right.
this is the marker of Johanna Inzi, made by my dad, Sam Miller Sr.
And who is Johanna Ingsi?
Johanna Inzi was my dad's second wife's mother. I believe she died in 1934.
Right. And your father made these iron crosses?
My dad made these iron crosses with the help of one of my brothers, Sam Miller Jr.
And do you remember ever watching him make them?
No, he was almost retired when I was growing up. His last blacksmith shop burned down in 1949 when I was 11 years old, and he had made all of these well before that.
Okay.
The first one was probably for his first wife, who died in 1917. And the last one was probably a Kirkenberg who died in the early 1940s.
All right. All right. Did you ever hear any stories about this woman?
No, I did not. No, I did not know her. She died before I was born, and I didn't even know about my dad's second marriage until I was in my late 30s.
All right.
It was probably not a happy marriage. They were only married for a couple of years. They didn't have any children by themselves. They had children before, and I believe my dad had children after. Whether my dad's second wife had children after, I do not know. I think he just had one son.
Right. Have you ever heard any stories about how he made these?
No, I do not. I did not. I was really not very interested when I grew up. I went into the service when I was 18, and most of the time I was gone from home. So he didn't talk about it to me. Maybe he did to his other sons, but not to me.
All right. All right, can you tell me where we're at now?
We're at the Mercer County Historical Society Museum at Beulah, North Dakota. This is the grave marker of Martin Widener. I believe Martin's wife was my dad's second cousin, and Martin died in 1936, I believe.
All right. Did you ever hear any stories about Martin?
I didn't know Martin personally. He died before I was born, but I knew a lot of his daughters and sons. And Martin was a photographer. He took pictures. I have some pictures that he took of my dad when he was young.
Oh, great. Did your father have specific criteria for deciding who he would build these crosses for?
That I don't know, but I think he started out doing it for, like I said, his first wife, and then probably another relative. When his son died, he made one for his son. And this Martin Widener came from the same village in Russia as my dad, and they probably knew each other in Russia before they came to the United States.
All right.
This marker had been at St. John Cemetery north of Zapp, and they took this off of the grave. And when his wife died, they put a regular marker on there, and this was in a pasture. So, with the permission of Martin's three daughters, I asked them if I could fix this up and place it here in the museum, so people could see the work that blacksmiths did in this area, rather than let it sit out in the pasture and deteriorate further.
Right. Where are we at today?
Today we're at St. James Lutheran Cemetery, 1 mile north of Golden Valley. We're at the gravesite of my mother and father. My father was born in Krontal, Crimea, Russia in 1884. He died in September 1964. He was a blacksmith for approximately 52 of his 80 years. My mother was born in 1902 in Hofnaugstall, Russia. She died in 1991.
Okay.
When they did the Iron Cross video, one of the questions they asked me, does your dad have an iron marker? And sadly I had to say no, but now he does have one. I had one made for him, made by Robert Greenshields from Dodge, North Dakota.
All right. Did you ever hear any stories about when your parents immigrated?
Yes, I used to ask my mother if she remembered the Statue of Liberty. She came to the United States when she was approximately 9 years old, and she said she didn't remember. And later I found out that she didn't remember it because she came through Baltimore. And my father came to the United States in 1910. He was already married and had with his first wife, and they came on the ship the Lusitania, which was sunk in, I believe, 1915 and got the United States into the First World War.
All right.
We're at the grave of my brother Leo Miller. He was born in March 17th, 1928 and died in 1971. He lost his hearing when he was approximately 15 years old. He had spinal meningitis, and another 12 hours he would have died. He died in a fire in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1971.
Where did you take him to a doctor?
They took him to, I believe they took him to Bismarck.
Were you close to him growing up?
Yes, I was, especially after he lost his hearing. I got along with him very well. He didn't wear hearing aids, but he read lips, and I always got along real well with him. He was 10 years older than I was, but we still got along real well.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your brother?
Yeah, I wish he was still living, but he's not. There's only have one brother living yet, and he's about 8 years older than I am. So, my brother Leo could do anything with his hands. He was a linotype operator. He worked with leather. He was a welder. Just that he had a drinking problem and couldn't get along with people. Thought they were talking about him around behind his back.
All right.
We're at St. Matthias Cemetery, Nysotz, 15 miles north of Golden Valley. This is the grave marker of Maria Beckel Miller, my dad's first wife. She died in a shotgun accident in 1917. My dad and his first wife, Maria, homesteaded approximately 3 miles east of here. She had a brother named George Beckel who lived in Halliday for many years. I knew him fairly well. Maria died many years before I was born, so I didn't know Maria. We're still at St. Matthias Cemetery, Nysotz, north of Golden Valley. This is the grave of Maria Beckles Miller's mother. Her name was Katharina Weigand Beckel. She died in 1913.
Was she born in Russia?
Yes, Katharina was born in Russia, and so was her daughter Maria. Maria was 27 when she died in that shotgun accident.
Did you ever hear any stories about their immigration?
They came together with my mother and his first wife, and Katharina's husband, George Beckel, and also George Beckel's father, Peter Beckel. They came to the United States in 1910 on the Lusitania. Peter Beckel, the grandfather, or the father of George Beckel, he died in New York shortly after the ship landed in New York.
All right.
We're at St. John's Wartenberg Cemetery, 7 miles north of Golden Valley. This is the grave marker of my brother Emil Miller. He died in 1934 of bone cancer. He was 18 years old. I think this was probably maybe the second or third one of these iron markers that my dad made. They're sort of unique, being they have the name on them.
They are unique. Do you have any idea how long it took him to make one of these?
No, I don't know how long, but I'm sure it was maybe probably a week or so. And where he got the idea, I would think maybe from Russia. They probably had something like this in Russia. Maybe not with the name on it, but maybe they didn't have the money for a regular headstone. So he made one of these with material he had on hand.
They're wonderful markers. Where else should we go in this cemetery?
Okay, right to my right, this is my grandfather's grave. Gottlieb Harsch is my mother's dad.
Did you get to know him very well?
He was, I was probably 6 when he died. I didn't know him very well. My brother told me that he was a real tall man, sort of intimidating looking, had big hands. My brother would go get his laundry. My mother did his laundry for him, and he would be very reluctant to ask him for anything because he was afraid of him. Not that he ever did anything to him, but just that he was such a big man.
Right. Do you know any other stories about your grandfather?
Very strict. My mother did not do well with milk products, but if she didn't eat, she would go hungry. Like I said, very strict. My grandfather homesteaded with his wife south of Golden Valley, probably about 6 miles near Medicine Butte.
Right. Did you know his wife very well?
No, his wife died before I was born. His wife died in 1930. She died of anemia. My grandfather was probably in his 70s when he died. My grandmother probably around 50.
Okay.
And my dad's parents, they did not come to the United States. They died in Russia.
All right.
We're at St. John's Wartenberg Cemetery, 7 miles north of Golden Valley. This is another one of the iron crosses that my dad made. When he made it, I have no idea, but probably in the 1940s. The church was here from probably 1910 until probably 1960, early 1960s. They closed the church and the members went to either Beulah or Zap, some to Hazen.
Is this the church where your father went?
Yes, when he moved into Zap, there was no church in Zap at the time. They went here. My brothers went to a German summer school out here with the pastor and stayed with a family named Adam Herman. Adam was the father of my oldest brother's wife.
Okay. Was this cross just made for decoration for the church?
I believe so, yes. Just as a permanent marker.
Right.
We're at St. John's Wartenberg Cemetery, 7 miles north of Golden Valley. This is the grave marker of Maria Knittel. She was born Hermes. I believe she was my dad's great aunt. She died in 1902, before my dad came to the United States, so he probably made this. This was probably the first one that he made. Probably as a favor to the family. This one is sort of simple, no name on this one. Just crosses, leaves. We're at St. John's, Wurtemberg, 7 miles north of Zap. This is the grave of Erwin Kirkenberg. I don't know how my dad came about to be making this marker. Probably somebody saw one of the other ones on in the cemetery and wanted one like it. Probably didn't have the money for the bigger marble headstone, so they had one made like this. This also has crosses and the name on the end of it. We're 15 miles north of Golden Valley. This is the area of my dad's homestead from 1912. He homesteaded 80 acres. He was never a farmer. He was always a blacksmith. Worked at a blacksmith shop in his home out here on the homestead, and then he worked in the little village of Casimir, which is probably 6 miles east of here. He lived here until approximately 1917 when his first wife died in a shotgun accident. And then he sold this land and moved into Zap in 1926.
Did your father ever tell any stories about homesteading out here?
Not to me. I'm sure he did to his older children, but I never did ask him about homesteading. Should have, but didn't. I remember seeing an auction bill when my dad sold all his things here. He had a lot of horses. I'd always heard that my dad was a good dog trainer, and that he had a dog that walked the treadmill and pumped water, and he sold that dog with the pump jack and the treadmill at the auction sale.
All right. Is there anything else you know about this area, this homestead?
I think the reason he homesteaded here was his sister Frederica Miller Mai homesteaded approximately half a mile west of here, and that was his connection to this area.
All right. The hills. I suppose there weren't many trees, though.
No,
when
probably
they came
not,
here.
and I know this road wasn't there.
Yeah.
The only roads were probably cattle trails and dirt roads. Went everywhere by horse and wagon. I remember my mother telling me that when my dad's first wife was shot, her son ran to the nearest farm, which was probably 2 miles, and didn't run to the Mai's. Ran a little bit further. Somebody had a telephone, and they called the doctor. Doctor didn't get here till for a couple of hours, and they had a 2-year-old son when she was killed.
That must have been so hard.
Oh, I'm sure it was, yeah. And then the children were they were taken in by different families. Evidently, my dad couldn't take care of them. My oldest brother would have been 9. The two girls were probably 6 and 5, and the youngest boy was 2. So they went to different families.
Did they manage to stay in pretty close contact, even though they were living with other people?
Oh yes, yeah. It was all right in this area. I think one farm was probably maybe a mile southwest of here, where the 2 girls were, and the boy probably a bit further away. But they all stayed pretty much in the general area. And then when my dad, I don't know if they lived with my dad's second wife and him. I think they did. I know the youngest of the children did. But I think they both drank a little bit too much, and they didn't get along very well. And then Emil died at 18, died of bone cancer. That was after my mother had already married my dad.
Okay.
She said they took care of him. They lived in Zap at that time, and he would have bone chips coming out of his shoulders and probably in a lot of pain.
So what kind of medical treatments were available for things like that?
I don't know if there was any. They probably took him to the doctor and probably kept him as comfortable as possible. But he was at home with them most of the time.
All right, can you tell me where we're at?
We're in Zap, North Dakota. We're at St. Luke's Lutheran Church. This is the church I was baptized in. I was born on Easter Sunday, April 17th, 1938. I was baptized here at St. Luke's on Dedication Sunday, the 5th of June, 1938. I remember the men sat on the right side of the church and the women sat on the left side of the church. And a teacher that was teaching school here in Zap, him and his wife came to church in Zap, and they sat on the same side, and you should have heard the people, I. Anyway, the people were sort of upset when the couple sat on the same side. And the younger children always sat to the front of the church, and the older you got, the further back you got. And my brothers told me that I would always fall asleep in church, and I would start leaning to one side, and they would be back there poking each other, saying, "Today's going to tip over," but I never did. This church was in business probably until 1980, and then it closed. Members going to Beulah.
Were the services in German?
They were originally. It probably started out in German, and then probably as time went along, they probably had three German, one English, and then eventually it was down to 3 English and 1 German, and then probably in the early 60s or mid 60s they stopped the German services entirely.
Is there anything else you remember about going to church here?
Not really. I was only 10 when we moved to Golden Valley, so I don't remember a whole lot about.
All right.
We're in the Mercer County Historical Society Museum at Beulah, North Dakota. I'm standing near one of my dad's display cases with some of his handmade tools. There's a couple of knives with wooden handles and a knife made out of a file, and also what they called a draw knife, or a Ziehmesser in German, that he made with a file, I believe. And the bottom item is a shovel made by my brother Sam with a braided handle. And behind that is a forge that would probably been in his shop. Maybe the one in his shop might have been bigger than that, but something similar to what my dad would have had.
You said that he made his own tools?
He made some of his own tools that probably went along with his making the iron crosses that he made for different people. I put these on loan to the museum so people could see what kind of work that blacksmiths did.
What kinds of things did your father do in his blacksmith shop?
Oh, he did a lot of welding. In the springtime, they were probably their work was probably with plowshares for the farmers, being they still used plowshares in that time. I saw a picture of my brother's shop here in Beulah at one time where he had over 500 finished plowshares laying on the floor. Probably did a lot of grinding with something similar to this. Probably would have been electric. All his tools would have been run by not a generator, but something that ran on a pulley up on top, and then they had belts running to different, to the anvil and to the forge and things like that.
Did your father ever have any other profession other than blacksmithing and working for the dam?
I think that's all he ever did. I don't remember him ever saying he did anything else. I think maybe he might have worked for the local coal mine around Zap during the winter time when the business was slack. I know my brother Sam worked for the coal mines, and I assume my dad did too.
Right. Was it just one of your brothers who followed in his footsteps?
Well, one of my other brothers, Leo, probably did a little bit of. I know he was a welder for a while, worked different jobs like that, welding, upholstery work. Probably learned some of the things from my dad. My brother Hugo says he used to do the grinding with the thing, and he says he still has scars on his knuckles from where he would slip off. He was probably playing more than he was working, and he said my dad would give him hell. But I was too young. I never got into that. And my dad quit blacksmithing when his shop burned down, and I was only 11. And the only time I was in the shop was probably playing, getting in the way.
All right.
Okay, the top item and the bottom item are homemade knives, probably made out of a file. They both have wooden handles. When I was young, I put my initial M on one of these knives, and I see the initial is still there. The middle item is a draw knife or a cheek knife for cutting wood or shaving down wood to make it fit. The knife was made out of a file, and it's got a metal handle with braided, I believe that's probably leather grips. The bottom was a shovel for probably taking ashes out of a coal stove, and it has a braided handle that was made by my brother Sam.